Welcome to this special episode of the Discographers. Brian and I had the opportunity to interview musician and audio engineer Danny Hyde. Danny worked closely with the band Coil. Coil was a band that Trent Reznor respected and asked them to remix several songs during the 90s. In 2012, Danny was able to provide fans with unheard and alternate remixes from those original sessions. In our discussion, we touch on some of those resurrected tracks, but Danny himself created a YouTube video detailing how he rediscovered those remixes. The link to his YouTube video is in this episode's description, along with many of the tracks that we touch on during this interview. How did you get involved with the Nine Inch Nails remixes in the 90s?
Well, they came via Coil. Peter Christopherson. As far as I know, Trent was a big fan of Coil, or was a fan of Coil. And so around, let me see, what year would it be? It'd be 1992. Pete, who I did a lot of work with the Coil boys, Pete said, we've got this remix to do. Band 9 Inch Nails, come over to the house, I'll show you a video. And he showed me, I think it was something to do with Hole. What was that song, Hole?
Head Like a Hole?
Yeah. He showed me the video for that. And I said, well, yeah, great, fine, let's do it. And so Trent sent over multi-tracks. I assume there were direct copies of the recordings, of the big studio recordings. And what we did is we messed around. We messed around with the bits, etc., etc. But in answer to your question, directly via Coil. Without Peter and Coil, it wouldn't have happened.
Very cool. Well, Brian here. It's a question just about kind of general workflow. When you make a remix, do you go into it with an idea from the outset after listening to the song, or you just sit down and see where it takes you?
Well, I tell you what, I'm now talking about then. Okay.
Fair enough.
Because what I will say to my person that I am now would be completely irresponsible. But I'm talking about then. I think it depended what drugs we were on.
That is perfectly fair and totally valid.
There was no plan. I mean, you've got to understand. I got one of the first Akai samplers in this country because I had a deal with Akai over some unpaid money to me, and because I'd been working with Fairlights and things. So at the end of the 80s, I managed to get hold of an Akai sampler very early. Right like number 2 in the country or something. So during the late 89 and 1990 and 1991, I did a hell of a lot of remixes for dance music, not with Coil, but with other guys. And normally in the studio, if truth be told, we were eat off our heads, or if it was a coke session, we'd be coked off our heads, and the remixes would take the shape of whatever we fancied. There was no pre-plan. But they all worked. I mean, some of them were number 1, records, like Adamski Killer track. The 12-inch remix of that we did outsold the original at the time, and it became a big number 1 hit around the world. But so we didn't feel we were doing anything wrong. We felt we were flowing. Looking back as an older person now. I can see the irresponsibility of people giving you money and trust, etc., etc. They'd be horrified if they knew how we worked. But we were so into it. They always got 100%. But which person they got, I guess they didn't know until the day. And so when the remix for 9 Inch Nails came up, I had done so many remixes with so many people in so many situations. It was just like I could do it almost in my sleep. I knew the way I wanted to work. And so it seemed the best way to do them was always get flowing on the day. It was 2 white coats and microscopes to try and sit and make a chess move before, hear the song 2 times and then make a chess move of where you're going to go. That never pans out well. What pans out well is to go with the flow and see where it's going and just go with it, I mean, the Gave Up remix is in a way is a good example of that, in that Pete and Jeff came in and we went mad for a couple of hours. Now, we weren't on drugs at this time, let me tell you. When we started the remix, in the morning we weren't. That's fair enough. And we got a really good thing going. And then I spent the whole night on my own in the studio. I didn't go to bed, refining little things for the guys to come in the morning and say the obvious. Well, it was better after we'd been working on it 2 hours, because after 2 hours you've got full enthusiasm, you've got full attention, and full emotion. And what happens after a few hours is you start trying to iron creases that don't need to be ironed, and you get too much into the micro detail. And you can almost blandify things a bit. So I'd spend the whole night, what I figured was sharpening things and perfecting things for us to decide that the one that we'd done like 8 or 9 hours before was actually the better version, So that's one example of a remix. Now, when we came to do Closer, we were a lot more organized. And rather than going to the studio with the multi-tracks to mix, we went into the studio to copy the multi-tracks to a format that we could take into our own home studios and work on whatever we wanted to. Pete in his house with his setup, me in my house with my setup. We're in the same time signature. We're working to the same key. Mm-hmm. And we know that when we come together, wherever we've been, they'll somehow be able to join, and we'll see what happens. And so that's what we did. So when we went finally into the big studio to remix Closer, we had 1,000,001 ideas on one side and 1,000,001 ideas on the other side. And then we had the actual song on the multi-tracks, and we fused them all together. And just see, and that you can imagine, you couldn't pre-plan how that's going to be. You couldn't say, we'll have 4 bars of your track 8, and then we'll go to 4 bars of my track 9. And then, it would be so complicated that the variations of what you could flick between would just be, billions and billions. So what you essentially do is you just get it all running, and you just got to go with what you feel. You just, I like that. Yeah, keep that going. Yeah, that's great. And even if that means you discard 70% of what someone's done over a whole intro section, if suddenly a few combinations of things come together and it just feels good, don't try and then see every other variation of what could, what might work. Like, okay, we'll try those 6 things, those 4 things, and 2 things from the multi-track. Oh no, that doesn't work. Try A, B, C, D, get rid of F, try G. You can imagine there's so many permutations. That's the word I was looking for. So many permutations there that you would kill yourself trying to figure them all. So you've got to go on emotion. You just got to go for those first couple of hours when you're ultra creative and ultra in touch with the thing, and just see what you enjoy, because let's be honest, at the end of the day, although looking back now, the money we were on was very good. And as a more mature adult now, I see the money aspect a little bit more than I did then. Then we didn't care. Then you just wanted to enjoy yourself. And afterwards, right, when the money came in your bank, oh, great, let's move on to the next thing. It was never part of the process of thinking. The most important thing was to enjoy what you were doing, So that was a long answer. That was a long answer. Eh?
That was a wonderful answer.
Yeah, it was an awesome answer. So on that Gave Up remix, at the very, towards the beginning, there's the vocals that are switching from the left and right channels. With the technology you had back then, that must have been super tedious, right? Nowadays you could you could copy and paste, but I think
you could, yeah. No, I tell you how that worked. That was a one run jam, if you like. I had this with the old Akai S1000. You had two knobs on the front. Okay, so when you were working on a sample, one would move. Let's say you were moving the start point. One would move the start point in, let's say, millions of a sample, and one would move the sample in micro portions of a sample. And so if you sat there, say you took the whole lead vocal and you put it in as one sample, And then what I did is I triggered that. Let's say I triggered that on 8s. So I had something firing that on 8s. Okay?
Yeah.
So, and then someone was sitting there with those two controls, and they were moving the start of that sample randomly, completely, not following anything, just doing whatever they fancied, throwing the controls around everywhere. You can imagine that the timing would always start on 8s, but where that would start would be anywhere in the middle of the first verse.
Right.
So anyway, I explained this idea to Jeff, and he said, well, I have a go. That Jeff being John Balance. And he sat there and we ran, and he just did this way he was doing this wobbling of the knobs, let's call it. Sounds a bit disgusting, but anyway, he was doing this wobbling of the knobs. While he's doing this wobbling of the knobs, I'm recording his output. So you're right. We didn't have hard drives so available then. So I'm not recording it to a hard drive to be cut and pasted, etc., etc. I'm recording it straight back to the multi-track. So anyway, run the multi-track. SMPTE code triggers my MPC 60, which is a drum machine. My drum machine fires out 8-beat clicks at the sampler, which should start on the start of the first verse. But because Jeff is moving the start point around, it's going to always start from a different place, as you can imagine. Any word, it could be any word or anything. So effectively, I think we did about 2 takes before, and it wasn't really happening. Then we just gave it one more go, and he seemed to land on a syllable each time. Because you can imagine if you land on a breath, when the 8-point trigger comes, there'll be nothing, and the voice could come in on a strange, like a semi beat, which isn't quite right, but it seemed to work, and it just that take worked. We said, yeah, that's great, keep it, move on. So again, that was not a process of trying to work out something and then doing it. It was just a random experiment to see what would happen, and it produced something that we liked, so we used it.
Sort of bottling chaos.
Yes, and that's what those. I think some of the best things that ever happened via that kind of thought process, which is the opposite of the white coats and the microscopes trying to. I have worked with guys. There was one particular guy who I won't name. He's not that famous, so you might not know him anyway. But he loved Coil, and he wanted to make an album. And I got stuck in a studio with him for a couple of weeks, and he was the opposite of that. The poor guy was such a control nut. He's since contacted me years later and said, "Oh, why didn't I just let you get on with it?" Because we had the most horrendous time. And I keep saying, don't put this pressure on yourself. Just have fun and we'll see what happens. But he was obsessed with every track had to be a certain way, and he'd pre-thought it through 100 billion times in his head how it was going to eventually be. And then he was trying to get that. And what that did was put so much focus on one song that the whole album didn't get really done, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely.
And that's the opposite. And I understand where he was coming from, because you get one shot. A record company gives you the money for one shot, and that's your one shot. And it's an immense amount of pressure. But the funny thing is, pressure doesn't work unless people just give in to, let's see what happens. It's a monster on your back, which will actually not enable you to perform as you normally would,
Yeah, you can be a perfectionist, but at some point you need to let go and just let it be what it is.
You need editors, you do need editors around you, someone to say, well, come on, which is that was Pete's great skill. Now, I would be the perfectionist, stroke control freak, stroke anal idiot, and he would be the one to say, no, that take was good, we can move on, So in that respect, Peter of Coil was a great man for giving everybody around him confidence that what they'd actually done, they didn't need to redo. It was good. Let's move on. So you're right. Everybody needs that. And within Coil, then that was Peter, because me and Jeff would have still probably been in there doing Love Secret Domain. Here we are 25, 30 years later.
So in some ways, many of your remixes for Nine Inch Nails seem maybe even a little bit more in line with the industrial aesthetic than the original tracks. And is that just something that happened as a result of the source material you were working with, or? I'd
say Coil probably had a big part of that. Because although I say work and see where it ends up, whenever I was pre-working on samples for the things, I always had them in mind. I'd done a lot of dance tracks in the early 90s, as I told you, and if anything sounded like that, I'd dismiss it quickly. So there was an internal filtering going on based on what I knew Coil might like. So in that respect, it was them being in the room which dictated probably that industrial angle, if you see what I mean, because they wouldn't have been too into dance beats and riffs.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of back towards your beginning, how did you get involved with Coil? To begin with.
Originally, a few years before that, I'd been a T-boy in a studio called Point Studio, and I'd got some friends in. If you want the long story, I'll give you the long story. You can chop it down quickly.
Yeah, we don't mind.
But so as a T-boy, I was T-boy in a studio called Point Studio, Victoria, and it was the first Christmas. I said to the studio, look, nobody booked the studio at Christmas. There's no clients. Can I play in the studio? I've got some friends. They want to try and do some ideas, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we did these demos, and the secretary heard them. It's a classic story. The secretary heard them and played them to a publisher, unbeknownst to us. And the publisher liked them. So he signed the band, and he got them a deal with Virgin Records. And we put out the first single, and it sold I don't know, 300, 400,000 in Europe. It didn't do so well in England, but it sold quite a lot in Europe. And so all of a sudden, I was 21 at the time. All of a sudden, I'm Virgin's new super producer, although I didn't see it that way. And Virgin was sending me all these bloody crazy acts that were for demos and stuff, and sending me to various studios around London to work with these bands. And they sent me to this place called Paradise Studio, which was in Chiswick, which was Europe's first computer-based studio. It's Fairlights, Synclavier, it had a wave term. Everything was automated, whereas in the old days, studios were very analog. This was just pure digital. And I got sent in this band. I won't name them, but they were complete arseholes. And they were speeding all night. They were really on the speed. And it was making them super paranoid, and they were doing my head in. But I stayed really calm. And I listened to this band, and I tried to help them, and blah, blah, blah. And when the session finished, the manager of that particular studio said, look, I love the way you handled that band. That was really difficult, but you handled them well. I'd like you to work here, sometime. And I said, well, great. Yeah, I'll work here. And one of the first clients he sent in, he said, well, we've got an all-nighter session. Nobody knows these guys. They booked to go through the night. Do you want to do it? I said, yeah, fine, I'll do it. And it was Coil. It's funny where synchronicity comes in. But I'd been out in Amsterdam with a friend of mine about 6 months before. And this friend of mine had given me an acid trip, which I didn't know anything about. Yeah. And I had the most horrendous time of my life. I had the greatest day of my life. And then I had the most scariest, horrendous time. And I had to mention this to the Coil boys because I was still completely freaked out by this trip in Amsterdam. And it was a perfect meeting because these were the perfect guys to talk to, So I'm working with the Coil guys, and I think looking back by my memory, we were doing the Hellraiser themes thing. So we're working all night on this kind of crazy music, and in the breaks, I had chats with Peter about this Amsterdam trip because I figured these guys are cool. They're not, most people you couldn't talk to about this kind of stuff. You couldn't talk to your family or anything, but I thought these guys will understand where I'm coming from. They might be able to give me some feedback on how to get over this bad experience. But as we chatted, it became obvious that, we like similar things, been through similar experiences, so to speak. And we got on really well. So what happened after that particular session is every time they booked Paradise, they'd ask for me. Although I was a freelancer, the studio would ring up and say, look, this band are booked back in. They've insisted it has to be you. Will you come back in and do the sessions? And so I did. And we just, we worked our way through the 80s doing Horse Rotavator and various projects. Mm-hmm. And by the time they hit Love Secret Domain, I was pretty much like they were like mates. They were friends wherever we worked. So we moved from Paradise. Wherever they went, they'd bring me along. And then when I got the sampler, the Akai sampler in the late 80s, of course, it became a part of building the Love Secret Domain album, So it was almost like you seamlessly slotted from the guy who was using them for therapy to suddenly producing them, And so that's how I met Coil. Yeah.
When you're working on these remixes, do you play any instruments? Are you generating any new sounds, or are you primarily manipulating? Combination of the two?
A combination of the two, because I'm not the greatest player in the world. Although I played bass for a long time. There's another story there. Probably eat yourself, nick my bloody bass guitar, the bastards. But when I was working with them, they've still got it. I still find them now and again and say, which one of you's got it? I know one of them's got it. But anyway, so I gave up playing. I was playing the bass for a few years, trying to get, become a muso. And once the bass went, I just gave up all pretensions of being a musician. So I play parts on everything I've worked on, but they'll be very basic parts because I've worked with some great musicians. I mean, some guys that are just phenomenal. And I realized, I'm never going to get to their standard. So don't even try. But certainly with easier things or simple melodies or simple chords, you can't be in a studio without hitting a keyboard and then changing a few sounds and thinking, well, that fits quite nice. I'll play that and I'll hide it in the back of the mix. And then all of a sudden it becomes a little bit louder in the mix and a little bit louder. And then everyone's accepted it and everyone enjoys it. And then you can't take it away because without it, people are saying, where's that keyboard part gone? So yes, I do. I play parts. But if I had good musicians around me, I would certainly use them first and then manipulate what they played or edit what they played. That would be my first choice. Let the players play and then edit what they've done. But if there's no one around and a part is needed, I'll try and do it, as long as it's not a jazz piano part, which would be impossible to play,
Yeah.
How long were you working on the remixes for the Downward Spiral? Was it a few months or over the?
No, the downward. Which ones? The original in 1994.
Yes.
Yeah, because
the original.
Yeah. That was a funny one because we'd been working on some Coil material at the studio, and suddenly those tracks came up. Pete said, "Look, we're going to do some more 9 Inch Nails stuff because we'd done Gave Up in 92, Closer in 94, in the beginning of 94, and then sometime in the middle of 94, Pete said, I've got some more stuff to do. We got some more stuff to do. So we were caught up doing other things. So unusually, we didn't do so much pre-planning for that. We did a little bit because I remember using my daughter's baby alarm, which is on Erasure and that baby alarm bits, so I definitely worked a bit from home, but my memory's gone a bit blank on how much we did, so it couldn't have been that much. But we ended up in a place called Metropolis Studio, and we spent half the week doing this band called Shaft, and then the other half week, which was literally just 2 or 3 days, doing Downward Spiral and Erasure. So if you added the totality of how long we worked on those 2 tracks, I would say 4 days. 4 days. On those 2 tracks, all variations and everything.
Safe to say that at this point in time, you guys had a decent workflow and working relationship.
Oh, they were very good times. I look back at them, so fun. You know what it's like. Life is a funny thing. Nobody recognizes when they're in a real purple period of their life. Nobody knows at the time. You figure, just carry on, or it'll get better. But looking back, the period from 1990 to 96 when we went to New Orleans was a great working period. Yeah, it was lovely.
So that was the initial sessions with the Downward Spiral, but then when you came the fan website, I think it was the NIN Hotline, came to you and asked if you had further remixes or tracks or any. What was the process of that like?
Did you see my video I put up about it?
Yeah, that was a really cool video. I just didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to expand on.
No, it's funny. As you noticed with that video, it sounds like I'm on cocaine, which I'm not. I will tell you here, clear on recording, I haven't touched a drug for over 10 years or alcohol for 2. So I just want that on record in case my kids listen to this, okay? So as you might have heard on that, I'm talking really fast because I'm trying to get all the information in. But
sure.
So it's very hard to expand on that because I think I squeezed everything in there. But
that's fine.
Yeah, it's as it says on the video. It's a shame I haven't got the script in front of me. I'd read it out again. Because
That's all right.
as you can imagine, when you're doing a video and you're trying to get a lot of information in one go, you have to script it up beforehand and then talk it through and then add it, and then cut the video. And so the script pretty much whittled down everything I wanted to say on that. But expand, let me think.
I mean, it's okay if you don't have anything to expand on. I just wanted to, kind of say it was just a really cool thing that happened as a fan of Nine Inch Nails, like when those surfaced, and it was, just the fact that somebody was willing to kind of go through their old stuff and say, oh yeah, I've got some extra stuff, and I'm going to put in some time and effort to kind of clean them up and make them presentable.
Well,
and it was really cool.
Do you know what happened with that? It was a perfect storm, because I've always drunk quite a bit in my life, and in 2012 I got hit with pancreatitis, which is a really painful condition.
Okay. And
have a look it up. Acute pancreatitis is so painful, and the doctors essentially said, give up drinking or die. So it was about a week after that when I'd given up drinking, and I just had so much energy, and I wanted to get stuck back in. This is an expansion on the video, so I don't mention this in the video, but I wanted to get stuck back into something. And I thought about the email from the Echoing the Sound forum guys.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna do that for them. I'm gonna go looking, and it was as I opened up the DATs and listened to the DATs, and I got the ideas of, well, pretty much I was there 100% during the time. Let's do this, And then it just expanded. At first, I just wanted to do Closer, because Closer on the DAT, I didn't have enough Closer on the DAT recordings of those days. And then it became, well, why don't we have a look at Erasure? And then it became, let's look at Down the Spiral. Suddenly I'd done the whole shebang. I'd done them all. And I thought, and a week had gone by, but I had a really, really enjoyable week. It was nice to have something to do. Now, if that had been 2 weeks before, or a month before, or 6 months before, it wouldn't have got done, because when I finished doing, let's say, earning a wage in the day, you'd find me in the bar. That's where I'd be. I'd be in the bar, as they say in inverted commas, relaxing, which is really just going and getting pissed,
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
But suddenly I had so much time and so much energy, and I wanted to do something. And it was nice being back in this little studio, feeling like you had a purpose almost. So I enjoyed it. I got a lot from that. I really did. There was no plans for it to be released. That came later, a year later. It was just purely to fulfill this kind of brief, and it was fun.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it, because I know all of us fans did too.
Good. Well, that's nice. It's nice because it was done in a good way. It was done in a good place. It was let's say recovering from an illness and wanting to have a purpose and if you've ever worked in studios, or if you've ever spent any time working in studios, there's a certain it's probably the same in a kitchen, in a restaurant kitchen. A really good restaurant kitchen is probably a similar vibe. It's kind of a team thing. And you have a purpose, and when you're away from that, even though it's nice to have time off, as the time goes by, you kind of miss it. And although there wasn't a team there, it was just me. The fact that I could remember all the characters of the time of when we were making them originally, they felt like they were in the room with me, And even though Pete and John are dead, I felt they were there, in the room. And it was nice to be linked back with that past,
That's absolutely beautiful, actually. Not to completely switch gears, but what is your workflow like now? Are you going primarily digital in a DAW, or are you using samplers, or?
I've still got the original. Funny enough, and I hope to God they keep going as long as I am. But I've still got. I managed not to sell my old gear. I managed to hang on to it. I'm so pleased I did, because it's great for calling up old things, or suddenly you remember a half-finished track from 15 years ago, and you got all the bits for it somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
So that's still there. But I mean, obviously, with the DAWs, everything's so much easier now. You can put an idea to bed and call it back 2 years, 3 years later, and it'd be exactly where it was. You're not resetting desks and, resetting keyboard settings, etc., etc., etc. So it's a combination of the two. I work with the keyboards and the sequencers, but essentially Ableton Live is like the boss of the thing now. Mm-hmm. So there's many half-finished songs that live in Ableton that you can just call back instantly and go, oh, yeah. With a fresh mind, you can go, oh, yeah, or, oh, no, sod that. It's so much easier. In the past, you might have had to reset everything, call up all the settings of the desk, reset all the keyboards, reset this, reset that, and then you decide, after all that effort, no, I don't really like this. But the problem was you spent so much time setting it up, you felt obliged to like it. Whereas now, with one button, you can call back something as it was 3 years ago, and you could just be totally objective with it because you're not invested the time in setting it back up. So it's a combination of the two. I probably 80-90% Ableton now, but the backup equipment's there if I suddenly want to call something from the past. But in terms of working time, we all get older. I have 5 children, unbelievably, and one of them is 8 and he's in Thailand, and I send money to his mother because his school needs to be paid and all this malarkey. So like every working stiff, I'm having to work in things which necessarily were not planned, i.e. not music. To recording to a degree, but nowhere near as it was. And so that's what my sort of day job is, let's say. And I fell into that because, I saw something for recording and I went along, and all of a sudden it's not recording as we knew it in big studios. Those have gone. It's out on the road recording. Well, for instance, this week I'm in bloody military court in Wiltshire recording the army, So that's the day job, but it pays so badly relative to what the music business paid, that what you do is you find you're on a hamster wheel. And now I don't begrudge it, because I know some people have been on that hamster wheel since their 20s, but you know the hamster wheel in that you can't stop working because the bills need to be paid.
Right.
So you can never take time away from it to think about what you want to do. You just got to keep trundling that wheel, because every month the paycheck comes in and it just about covers the bills, and it covers, your kids' expenses, etc., etc. And you want to sit back for a month? No, you can't. You've got to get back on the wheel. So what's happened is I've got about 2 or 3 projects which people nicely are pestering me for. They haven't paid me anything because they're my projects, but they've nicely promised to provide the funds to manufacture the thing, but they need something to manufacture. And I keep saying to them, I'll get to it. And that's the first time in my life where I can't get to something. Not because I'm drinking, because, in the past when we had all the time in the world, we wasted it, at bars and stuff. But now we have no time. Now we have literally no time. I got back Friday. I've had to deal with the house and the bills and everything that needs to be done in the house. And I'm away for another week tomorrow. I'll be back probably Friday, and then I'll be somewhere else. It's unfortunate, but it's the reality of life. I gone are the days when I can just take time to meander around in my studio and see what happens. Now we've got a dedicated project we've got to do, which is like an album. Let's use an album as an example. An album promised. The album's got to be written. When it's going to be written, I have no idea. How it's going to be written, I have no idea. I have a few ideas, a few this, a few that, but will it get written? I don't know. Will I die before it's ever written? I have no idea, because those bills have got to be paid, And so, but that's, I sometimes I kick myself in the head for being in this situation. But then I remember that I had a great run of being totally free and doing what the hell I wanted. And now I'm just doing what, the majority of the world has had to do since day one, which is pay those bills.
Yep. I mean, that's kind of, for us, we do this podcast, we release once a month. A lot of podcasts are weekly or even daily. And for us, we have we have outside lives and jobs and families. So
sure. I can relate to that. Once a day, God, that'd be hard work, because you've got to edit this thing down, and then you've got to,
those ones have it down to a science where they just, they record whatever they have and then they send it out. like a daily news podcast.
Gotcha.
But typically, those ones that are basically under enough financing that is their actual job.
Yeah, I think so.
Gotcha.
It must be.
Well,
It's gotta be.
I tell you what, it might be a similar parallel world, but I play a lot of poker. You know, the game poker, and
Yeah.
I've subscribed to quite a few guys that do vlogs on YouTube. You know, poker guys.
Yeah.
And some of their videos are really starting to look professional. So I think you're right about the fact they're getting outside finance, because there's no way in the world they can play poker 12 hours a night and then have this beautifully constructed vlog within a day and a half when they're back playing poker. They must have outside funding to provide editors and stuff. And the fact that they've got so many subscribers now, their advertising is probably interested, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, in a way, I'm very jealous of those guys. They're doing the fundamental thing we all love. They're doing something they love, and it's making money for them. Now, you can't get better than that, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
We'd love to
indeed.
be there at some point.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I was there as a music teacher for 6 years, but now I gotta pay real bills, so salary jobs.
So you play, Brian, yeah?
Yeah, I play a handful of instruments. It's funny hearing you talk about, you know, the studio being the spot where everything's okay, because I spent the last 7 months with the band that I play with converting their garage into a full-on studio.
All right. I hope
and
that
it's just that level of escape you were talking about is there.
they're great places. You know, I mean, we're all adults, but we like to be like kids again sometimes. You know,
Exactly.
And the studio is. I mean, you could be in the studio till you're 102. You'd still enjoy it. It's a great place to be.
Yeah, it certainly is.
So one thing that I've always wondered with like remix albums, you can probably answer for the Downward Spiral remixes, but maybe if in general, when someone is asked to do a remix, are they given, like for the Downward Spiral, were you given all of the tracks and you guys kind of picked out songs that you were interested in, or were you given, like, were you told, hey, could you please do Closer or Eraser?
No, we were certainly told which songs to do, because I'll tell you what, it would have been great, but it would have been very expensive.
I'm sure.
If Trent had sent every remixer all the songs and said, pick one, you know, we might have ended up with an album of 10 versions of Closer and nothing else. Who knows?
Yeah, I've always wondered about that.
No, he certainly sent us because he sent us the multi-tracks just on those particular songs, you know. So it was certainly a decision over at their end. Maybe Trent sat there and thought, well, this one's good for Coil, this one's good for Jack Dangers, this one's good for whoever, you know. Mm-hmm. But certainly we didn't get free reign. We certainly didn't get to listen to an album and pick what we fancied working on. Although that would be really nice, you know, that'd be a cool way of doing it, and because you could get people who are really they felt they'd made a choice on something, and so they'd be invested even more to make it good, you know. But having said that, we tried this. We never shirked. We never ever said, oh, well, I'm bored. It wasn't bored. The word bored never got mentioned. So you know, I'm not saying it would have been any better, but I could see the advantages of having someone pick which one they'd like to do. Yeah. It only happens with smaller bands. Smaller bands on the net sometimes send me an album, say which one you want to do. Mm-hmm. And then they disappear once we talk about the price. It's like people imagine that you work for free, I'm sure, you know.
Oh yeah. Isn't that always the way?
Yep.
You must have had that. The amount of times you get promised, oh, look, it'll be great advertising when it goes big or whatever, you know.
No, you're doing it for the exposure.
Yes, you're doing it for the exposure and possible royalties, which no one ever gives you a contract for anyway, so you know they disappear. If it ever got really big, they'd have big lawyers telling you won't gain anything, you know.
Yep. Oh,
yeah, the money people would come in. So, I mean, I know you have your day job kind of projects. Do you have are there any projects that like do you have, I know you have your side band.
Electric Surge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that something that's still active, or
most certainly is
you
active.
pick it up every once in a while?
No, that's the thing that's got to be done next. There's a record company in Italy who nicely put out the second CD, and they, bless them, it must have gone quite well because they keep sending emails. In fact, I've got a reply to one today saying, you know, hey, how's it coming along? And I'm always very honest with them and say, I've got ideas.
Right.
You know what it's like. If you get yourself into the studio and you're in the right frame of mind, you can create something incredibly fast. But or you can sit there for a week and nothing will happen. It's luck of the draw sometimes. But time is what we don't have. Time is more valuable than gold, but we don't have it.
Right. So if people want to support you, that would be the best way to kind of show their love for you.
What, as opposed to sending me gold bars? No, gold bars.
Well, yeah,
unacceptable.
I don't know if you want to put out your address, but yeah.
I tell you what, things chug along quite nicely. The job I work, I certainly couldn't survive just on that. But every now and again, we get royalty statements and things. Unbelievably, I've just got one this weekend. When I got back, there was one waiting from a job that I did in 1990. Can you imagine that? A job I did in 1990. This is when record companies are honest. Not all of them are, but this happens to be EMI, unbelievably. EMI Warners in Spain, and they've just sent me another statement for sales of last year. I mean, I thought the contract only lasted 25 years, so I'm going to stay quiet. I'm going to say thank you very much. It's not for much, but it's the principle, and I'm very happy for it,
Yeah.
But things tick along. But I mean, if anybody wanted to support anything, I'd never pressurize anybody. I'd hope they'd like the thing. I think actually Electric Sewer Age 2 is a really, really good album. I genuinely think it's a really, really good album. And there's still a few copies of that floating around for sale. So if they ever wanted to support, they should try buying the vinyl of that. The CDs all went, but I still have a few vinyl left on that. And I think it's a really good album. And if you want a really outlandish statement,
sure.
Oral Rage album Nature of Nonsense, which I did when I made purposely to be as far away from Coil as I could be, because I knew that at the time, this was very early internet days, at the time the only people I'd be able to get to know I'd done this thing were Coil fans, and I didn't want it to be a Coil clone. Mm-hmm. So it has quite a bit of humour in it, and I listened to some of it the other day, and yeah, sure, some of it could be mixed better, it always can. But I thought to myself, after I'm dead, I think this album will gain the recognition it should get. That's what I thought, because I actually think there's some bits on there that are fucking brilliant, really. But, it chugs along, and I printed up X number of them all those years ago. We're going back, 13 years now. And every now and then I sell a few more, and it's unbelievable. They just chug away. They're like the gift that keeps on giving. But one day they'll all be gone. And I do believe one day some film producer or something or director will have heard this stuff. And when he's grown up later, he will actually use some of it, and then it will get the recognition it should have got. That's what I think. I could be completely delusional.
Well, you have to hope and dream, yeah.
Well, I tell you what, I love doing it. So the fact that, I've got to be honest, it paid for itself. And when I did it, I just wanted to do it. And I had great fun doing it, and I don't regret a minute of it. I'll tell you another funny thing is I get lots of offers to do live gigs. Can you imagine that?
Like remixing?
Well, exactly. Sad old man sitting up there with a laptop. This is why I turn them down, because I can't imagine a show. To me, a show is good lighting, or something like Daft Punk put on a good show, or lots of sexy women put on a good show, or salsa bands. They've got all the personalities up there putting on a show. Some middle-aged geezer with a laptop, to me, does not look like a show. So I turn them all down. But I tell you what, there's a part of me that thinks, you know what, just for the experience, why don't we do it one day? Why don't we do it? And these are festivals in Germany and places. There's one at the moment, a festival in Italy asking me if I'll do it. What they want me to do, I don't know. I would imagine they're expecting a show. But I can't. To me, I can't imagine a show with just a bloke with a laptop. It just looks so highly boring. We can't all do craft work and stand there like we're bored.
Well, maybe that's the angle. Maybe it's performance art.
I did think of a William Burroughs type thing. Just get wheeled on there with an armchair, with a little blanket over your knees, and then just sit there, and like this antiquated computer, and then just press go and have some really heavy tunes in there. Use all the heavy tunes. But it's certainly something every year I give consideration, and then a combination of cowardice and logic makes me turn it down. But some of the money that's been offered has been quite good, and I need to talk to some people who actually do live shows and try and garner their experience of I wish the Coil guys were still alive, because I'd be straight on to Peter and talk to him about it, and he'd put a show together for me, no problem. But it might happen. It might one day happen. And if people throw their cans of beer at me, well, fine. That was an experience that went bad, But we did it. It was one thing you couldn't knock off the list that you did,
Yeah, you gave it a shot, and now you know.
You gave it a shot and it failed miserably. Well, there you go. Move on. Yeah. No, I can imagine it would be okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's another thing in the endless list of things we've got to get done at some point. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But it's nice to get the offers. When the offers stop, then I'll suddenly make a show. No one will want it. But
well, it was awesome talking to you, and thank you so much for setting aside this time and talking to us about and answering all our dumb questions.
No, it was fun. It was real fun.
We had fun.
Yeah.
Good.
Honestly, there's some nuggets of knowledge that you dropped during this that I'm going to be passing along to my band to get them out of their heads as we're recording.
Oh, well, good luck with the recording. I tell you, that's always fun. That's great. Yeah. It's a great time.